The father wound. When the past commands the present, we are born into our parents' stories before we ever write our own. And of the two archetypal voices that shape us, the father's is often the most thunderous, even in silence. Not because he speaks more, but because his presence or absence is so deeply coded into the architecture of our identity. The psychological blueprint of a child from infancy, we form our sense of self by reading emotional cues from caregivers. If a mother offers nurturance, the father often represents structure, boundary, and the first mirror of external validation. The approving father becomes the seed of self-worth. The distant or rejecting father becomes the echo of internal doubt. The authoritarian father becomes the foundation of inner tyranny. When love is conditional, many people grow up internalizing this equation. If I do well, dad smiles. If I fail, I am invisible. This conditionality teaches us that love must be earned, and so we become achievers who can't stop striving, people pleasers who collapse their needs, rebels who would rather be rejected than controlled. But behind these roles is the same wound, a child still trying to reach a father's unreachable gaze. The types of fathers we inherit, even if they're gone. No two fathers are the same, yet many fall into patterns that repeat across cultures and generations. These patterns don't just shape childhood memories, they shape how we relate to power, love, risk, and even ourselves. Let's explore some of the most common father types and how they echo in adulthood. 1. The absent father, the echo of emptiness. This father was emotionally or physically unavailable. He might have left early, been distant while present, or emotionally shut down. His child grows up wondering, was I not lovable enough to keep him close? Why do I feel invisible in every room I walk into? As adults, they often avoid deep intimacy, struggle to trust commitment, feel like something vital is always missing. 2. The critical father, the inner perfectionist's voice. He noticed flaws more than efforts. His love felt like a performance contract. Be excellent, and maybe I'll approve. The inner critic this father leaves behind becomes a constant fear of failure, shame around rest or imperfection, overachievement as a survival tactic. 3. The authoritarian father, the shadow of control. This father demanded obedience and offered little warmth. Because I said so was the final word. His children often confuse control with love, seek dominant partners, feel guilt for asserting themselves. 4. The idealized father, the pedestal that collapses. Sometimes, the father was kind, successful, even adored, but placed so high that the child could never measure up. Later in life, they might fear disappointing others, chase impossible standards, sabotage success to avoid comparison. These father ghosts don't just haunt us, they quietly shape our jobs, marriages, fears, and identities. Unless we meet them consciously, we live as actors in a script we never wrote. Symptoms of the unhealed father wound. You don't have to remember your father clearly to carry his imprint. The father wound isn't always a conscious memory. It often appears as a series of repeating emotional struggles, relationship patterns, and inner conflicts. Emotional symptoms. A persistent sense of not being enough, even when praised. Fear of abandonment or rejection. Deep shame when expressing vulnerability. Trouble identifying or trusting your own needs. This internal landscape is often shaped not by what was done, but by what was missing. Relationship patterns. Unhealed. Father wounds often manifest in love and attachment, craving validation from emotionally unavailable people, choosing controlling or critical partners, sabotaging closeness out of fear. It won't last. Playing caretaker to receive affection. Even people with secure adult relationships may find echoes of their father dynamic under stress. Behavioral and life patterns. The unconscious impact of a father wound can influence workaholism or perfectionism. If I achieve enough, I'll finally feel worthy. Difficulty with authority, either blind obedience or rebellion, constant seeking of external approval, emotional numbing through addiction, distraction, or avoidance. The cycle of reenactment. Most profoundly, the father wound tends to recreate itself. You become the same kind of parent, boss, or partner you resented. You treat yourself with the same coldness or criticism you received. You chase approval from people who mirror your father's traits. Unless brought into conscious awareness, this wound becomes a legacy we unknowingly pass on. How the father wound shapes identity and the inner voice. Long after we leave childhood, the voice of the father lingers, not just as a memory, but as the tone of our inner narrator, We may think we're making adult choices, but often we're reacting to an inner critic that sounds eerily like our father. The internalized father. This is not the actual father, but the psychological echo, a composite of tone, posture, approval, or lack thereof. If he was harsh, your inner voice may demand perfection and punish failure. If he was absent, your voice may whisper doubts. You don't matter. If he was unpredictable, your voice may sound anxious, always trying to avoid mistakes. This internalization becomes the blueprint for how we treat ourselves and allow others to treat us. Identity distortion. The father wound doesn't just affect self-esteem, it warps identity. People with unresolved father wounds may build their personalities around pleasing or avoiding authority, pursue success not for joy, but to feel enough, over-identify with toughness, hiding emotional needs, abandon dreams because they were never validated. You start confusing who you had to be with, who you really are. The risk of self-abandonment. At its core, the father wound teaches this dangerous belief: being me isn't safe. So we adapt, perform, shrink, or overextend, just to avoid rejection or judgment. We exile our authenticity and call it maturity. But underneath the mask, the true self waits, lonely, unheard, and deeply alive. The shadow of the father, complexes, control, and the repetition trap. The most powerful forces in our lives are often invisible, and few forces are more quietly commanding than the unconscious imprint of the father, whether loving, absent, abusive, or idealized. The father's shadow often becomes a central character in our inner theater, governing how we relate to love, success, conflict, and authority. Freud, Jung, and the origins of the father complex. In early psychoanalysis, the father became more than a parent. He was a symbol. Freud's Oedipus complex framed the father as a rival in the child's quest for the mother's love.
If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support.
Jung's concept of the father archetype expanded that idea. The father is not just personal, but a mythic and cultural blueprint for structure, judgment, power, and morality. When the father figure is distorted, too punishing, too distant, too idealized, the developing psyche fractures. The result is what psychologists call a father complex, an unconscious emotional constellation tied to power, punishment, approval, and identity. How the complex controls. As a father complex doesn't always feel dramatic. It often feels normal. That's how it hides so well. Until one day you begin to notice you chronically seek approval from bosses, mentors, or strong personalities. You feel immobilized by the fear of doing it wrong. You rebel against structure, even when it could help you. You fall into relationships that mirror the father's energy, either dominant or dismissive. These reactions are rarely about the present moment. They're driven by an emotional shadow cast years before, one we haven't fully seen. The repetition. Compulsion. Freud noticed something strange. Humans tend to unconsciously repeat painful experiences, not to suffer, but to gain mastery over what once felt powerless. This is the repetition compulsion, and it explains why daughters of emotionally cold fathers often chase emotionally distant partners. Sons of authoritarian dads become hyper-controlling, often without realizing it. High achievers raised by critical fathers never feel enough, no matter how much they succeed. What's really happening? We're restaging the original wound, hoping that this time we'll win the approval or love we couldn't get before. But the stage is rigged. The story repeats. The mask of the false self. In response to a painful father dynamic, many people build what Donald Winnicott called a false self. This isn't who you are. It's who you learn to be, to stay safe or loved. This false self might be the overachiever, the tough one who never cries, the pleaser who avoids conflict, the rebel who pushes everyone away. But these personas are performances. Underneath them is a scared, yearning self, one that learned early that being authentic might mean being unloved. The neurobiology of father imprints. Modern neuroscience confirms what Freud and Jung once intuited. Early experiences with attachment figures, especially fathers, literally shape the developing brain. The imprint of a punitive, absent, or erratic father influences. Cortisol regulation. Children with authoritarian fathers often grow up with hypersensitive stress responses, always scanning for threat. Limbic system reactivity. Emotional memories encoded during conflict or neglect become templates for adult reactions. Default mode, network activation. This area governs self-talk. If a child internalized criticism, their brain is primed to repeat those negative beliefs as truth. So when a grown man says, "I can't stop hearing my dad's voice in my head," it's not poetic, it's neurological. But there's good news. Neuroplasticity. We can rewire the brain. But first, we have to confront the echo. When you become him without knowing. Perhaps the cruelest irony of the father complex is this. We often become what we most feared or hated. You swore you'd never yell like your father, yet now you do. You hated how emotionally distant he was, but now you withdraw the same way. You resented the pressure he placed on you, yet now you pressure your own kids the same way. Why? Because the father's behaviors weren't just witnessed. They were downloaded into your nervous system when you were too young to resist. To heal, we must stop blaming ourselves and start recognizing the program we've inherited. Healing through language and consciousness. Transformation begins when you name what was once hidden. Statements like, "This isn't who I am, it's who I became to survive." "My constant striving is an echo, not my essence." "I am not my father, and I don't have to parent like him." By externalizing the inner critic, we weaken its grip. By bringing awareness to the repetition cycle, we interrupt it. By offering ourselves compassion, we begin to speak in a new voice, our own. Therapeutic practices that help. Inner child work, meeting the version of you that got shaped by that early dynamic. Parts work, IFS, internal family systems. Identifying the inner critic, the protector, the performer, and giving them new roles. Journaling, writing letters to or from your father to process unfinished emotional business. Somatic work, helping the body feel safe enough to let go of inherited tension. Conclusion, turning the shadow into a guide. The shadow of the father doesn't have to remain a prison. If we face it, not with rage, but with clarity and courage, it can become a teacher. We stop asking, "Why did he do this to me?" And we start asking, "What did I learn from surviving him?" When we integrate the shadow, we reclaim the gifts buried beneath the wound. Leadership, without tyranny, strength, without shame, boundaries, without fear, love, without condition. And slowly, we become what we never received. A voice that guides gently. A presence that protects without control. A father we can live with, within the cultural superego. When society echoes the father's voice, there is a father in every institution, a patriarch in every rulebook, a disapproving gaze built into the very structure of society. Even when we have healed parts of our personal father wound, many of us still carry the burden of a cultural father, the collective superego that shapes who we should be. This third layer of influence is subtler, but no less powerful. It is society itself acting as a mirror of the unresolved father. Stern, evaluative, conditional. What is the cultural superego? In Freudian theory, the superego is the part of the psyche that internalizes rules, morals, and ideals, often inherited from authority figures like parents. But beyond our family, culture becomes the next great parent. Religion teaches what is sinful. School defines who is worthy. Media shows what is beautiful. Capitalism rewards productivity, not presence. Together, they form a kind of outer father system, demanding, watchful, and rarely satisfied. This cultural superego whispers, "Be better. Don't be weak. You're only as good as your last success." Masculinity, power, and the father ideal. Cultural masculinity often reflects a distorted father archetype, stoic, invulnerable, dominant. From action heroes to CEOs, the message is clear. Be tough, be in control, don't feel too much. This conditioning harms everyone, not just men. Boys learn that sadness is shameful. Girls learn that power must come through perfection or pleasing. Non-binary and sensitive children are often excluded altogether. In this system, softness is weakness, expression is danger, dependency is failure. In other words, the father's shadow is institutionalized. Education as obedience training. In most modern school systems, children are taught to obey rather than think, perform rather than explore. A student's value is measured by grades, not growth compliance, not creativity, test scores, not emotional intelligence. This molds young people into achievers, but also into approval addicts who equate love with performance. Teachers become surrogate fathers. The gradebook becomes the mirror. The red pen becomes judgment. And the child learns, if I'm not excellent, I'm not enough. Capitalism as the relentless father. In the capitalist world, your worth is often tied to what you produce. This system reflects the same energy as a conditional father. You are valuable only when you are useful. People internalize this message and work themselves to exhaustion without rest. Feel guilty when relaxing or playing link identity solely to career success. View failure as proof of unworthiness. Burnout isn't just about workload, it's a father wound played out economically. Rebellion and the anti-father. Some respond to the cultural superego, not with compliance, but with rebellion. This too is rooted in the father wound. Instead of healing the dynamic, the rebel flips it. If I can't win your love, I'll reject your rules. If you won't see me, I'll shock you. If approval is conditional, I'll destroy the system. But rebellion still keeps the father at the center. It's still a relationship, just inverted. Real freedom comes not from fighting the father, but from no longer being ruled by his shadow. Media and the mirror of judgment. Social media has intensified the superego's gaze. Now it's not just one father, it's thousands. Followers evaluating your life. Algorithms rewarding conformity, metrics replacing meaning. We curate perfection to avoid being dismissed. We hustle to impress people we don't even know. It's not just the father's voice in our head now, it's the whole world acting like him. Reclaiming the self from collective conditioning. To break free from the cultural father, we must notice the shoulds. Whose voice is this? What inner rule am I following? Choose presence over performance. Can I be worthy without producing? Can I rest without guilt? Practice disobedience. Not out of spite, but out of alignment. Saying no to systems that demand your soul in exchange for approval. Return to the authentic self, the one who existed before the conditioning. Conclusion. From superego to sovereignty. The father wound is not just personal, it is political, economic, and cultural, but you are not powerless. The more you see the hidden scripts of family, school, media, and money, the more you can write your own. Healing is not just about forgiving your father, it's about becoming the author of a life that no longer needs his ghost to guide it. You are not a product. You are not a role. You are not a score. You are a sovereign soul. And that is enough. Healing the father wound. Integration, wholeness, and becoming your own guide. The journey of healing the father wound is not about blame. It's about reclamation. It's not about erasing what happened, but about choosing who you become because of it. Many carry this wound for decades, silently, shamefully, unknowingly. But there is a path toward wholeness, and it begins with seeing. Name the wound. Before healing, there must be clarity. Ask yourself, what was missing or painful in my relationship with my father? What patterns in my adult life reflect that loss? Whose voice speaks inside me when I fail or fall short? Naming the wound removes its invisibility. It gives you the power to relate to it, rather than from it. Meet the inner child. Every father wound begins in childhood, and every healing journey must return there, not to stay stuck, but to retrieve the forgotten self. The inner child is the version of you that needed love, but got silence. That felt fear, but couldn't run. That shrunk to be acceptable. Practices like guided meditations, journaling, and visualizations can help reparent the self. Say things like, you didn't deserve that. You were always worthy of love. I see you now. These words, once missing, can begin to build a new internal foundation. Repair the internal father. Even if your real father is gone, unreachable, or unwilling, the inner father can be reformed. You do this by becoming protective without being controlling, encouraging without being shaming, honest without being cruel, present without being overpowering. Ask yourself, if I were the father I needed, how would I treat myself today? The goal is not perfection, it's presence. Let grief have its place beneath anger. There is always grief. Grief for what you never received. Grief for what could have been grief for the self you lost in the effort to earn love. This grief is not a step backward. It's a sacred threshold. It opens the heart and clears space for something new. Let yourself cry. Let yourself rage. Let yourself long. This pain, when felt fully, becomes compassion. Rewire. Relationships. Unhealed. Father wounds often manifest in our closest relationships, seeking unavailable partners, needing to prove your worth constantly, fearing abandonment, yet pushing people away. As you heal, relationships shift. You no longer chase approval, you choose mutual respect. You stop overgiving to earn love. You learn to receive. You set boundaries, not to punish, but to honor your peace. Healing doesn't mean being perfect in relationships. It means relating from wholeness, not from holes. Root in self-trust. One of the most enduring effects of the father wound is self-doubt. When your early mirror was distorted, critical, absent, or conditional, you question your own instincts. Healing asks, can I trust my no without guilt? Can I make decisions without fearing punishment? Can I validate myself without external applause? Self-trust is built like a muscle. Start small. Celebrate honesty. Honor your voice. With time, your inner compass grows stronger than any inherited script. Integrate the sacred masculine. The toxic or distorted father is not the only masculine archetype. Across cultures, sacred masculinity is seen in the wise king who protects with grace, the spiritual warrior who acts with honor, the generative father who creates life, not just rules it. Integration means reconnecting with this noble masculine energy, whether you identify as male or not. It is fierce, yet tender. It holds space, yet takes action. It loves without control. You're not rejecting the masculine, you're redefining it. Pass it on, but change the pattern. If you are a parent, mentor, leader, or creator, you now carry the torch. The healing you do ripples outward. Children feel safer, partners feel seen, communities grow softer, braver, freer. The final task of father wound healing is not just self-liberation. It's becoming the kind of presence that breaks the generational cycle. You become what you never received, and in doing so, you end the story differently. Final thoughts. You are the father. Now, there will always be moments where the old voice returns, but now you have a new voice too, your own. You can father yourself with compassion. You can guide without shame. You can love without fear. The father wound does not define you, your healing does. And in that healing, you become whole. Not because you were broken, but because you were always enough, waiting to be reclaimed. Welcome home.